Today we are going to jump into a story called Each Man Owes a Death. Now, I know it's going to be a Western. I know it's going to be a supernatural Western. One of my goals is to keep it concise. I typically write some short stories on stream, but some of them have been running 2, 3, sometimes 4,000 words. I want to keep it down under that so that it's mostly action, mostly moving. And I kind of have an idea of where this is going to go, so that it shouldn't be too terribly difficult to stay focused, get a nice, concise story. If I need to add more to it when the editing phase comes, I can do that. But typically it's better to cut than to add. So let's see what we can do here. All right, Dex Kitchens. Pretty much a cowboy name, wouldn't you say? Dex Kitchens stood across from the man he had trailed his entire life. Let's say, okay. His hand hovered over the butt of his gun, holstered at his hip. The fellow across from him prepared to draw left-handed. Dex never trusted left-handed gunslingers. When it came down to it, he didn't trust much of anyone. The fellow's bony hand hung dead still above his weapon. Cold, okay, hold on, let me fix that word. Cold nerves didn't twitch a bit. Dex had a twitch. Let me put a dash here. Dex had a twitch more than a few. Maybe it was one that traveled. Sometimes it settled in his face or shoulder. Other days it plagued his hands. A day like today, it would not do to twitch anywhere from the shoulder down. He'd likely find himself shot dead before he was ready to draw. Dex's name was short for something, but he couldn't remember what. The opponent, the nemesis, went by many names over the years of this chase to this final showdown. Mossman, Picket, Champion, and more. But Dex just thought of him as the dead man. Dead man. Let me make that a compound word. Dead man was either laying down today, or he was bringing death himself. The bony fingers opened, but did not grab. And pull. Testing Dex's nerve, seeing if he could cause the twitch. The fingers were literally bony. Put another dash. No flesh. No blood. Just bones leading up into his duster sleeves. All his teeth showed. I should make that a new paragraph. All right. All his teeth showed. In a wide skeletal grin. Empty sockets stared unblinking where living men kept their eyes. A tan hat rested low on the exposed skull of the gunslinger across from Dex. The dead man was a skeleton in cowboy gear with the killing tool of a man. Loaded full. All right. Dex didn't much care how this contest ended. Sure, he rooted for himself, but just that it would be over before sundown was enough for him. The rip crack of the shot surprised. Okay, let me say the rip crack. Let me put a dash there. The rip crack of the shot surprised them both. Dex never saw the dead man's arm move. He just heard the shot echo through the abandoned mine town. Dead man lifted his hands away from his sides and felt through his shirt. Say over his shirt. Felt over his shirt. Come on now. Felt over his shirt as if he were a man who could bleed and expected to be doing so. They met eyes again. Let's say they met gazes. They met gazes again. Dex's eyes and dead man's empty sockets. Another volley of shots kicked up dust from the street and splinters from weathered boards of empty buildings. They both scattered. Dex and the dead man. Thank you, Zach. I appreciate it. Hey. Alright, they both scattered. Dex and the dead man, each to his own cover. Dex caught a glimpse of the attackers from their positions of ambush. They were regular flesh and blood, not skeletons like the one he came here to fight. That made him feel no better. Having skin never made Dex trust anyone more. The windows lacked glass, but there were enough shards to cut himself on if he chose to take a dive. A little glass beat a little bullet any time, but Dex always sought a way to save his skin in the end. He ran along the edge of the structures, feeling the shrapnel of impacts all around him as he ran further than was wise. He saw his spot and understood it was too far at the same time. Maybe someone was reloading. Or the wind favored him, but Dex made his dive over the low wall without getting hit and landed in sand instead of stone or glass. Dex finally reached for his gun and prepared to put his own lead into the discussion. Alright. He looked into the empty sockets of a skull. The dead man had lost his hat. The bone plates of the skull were more yellow-brown than they were white. He never intended to get this close to death. The skeleton gave a nod, like they were old friends. Dex supposed they were well acquainted at the very least. Bullets rang off the stone above them. Bullets rang off the stone above them, and Dex still had not drawn. The skeleton extended his hand. As the sleeve pulled up, Dex saw the space between the bones of the arm. He had fought this moment all his life, but death came to every man in time. thinking otherwise was a fool's game. Maybe this was it. Dex had resolved himself to that possibility. These jokers who tracked him and death to this spot were not going to let him walk out anyway. Dex reached out and took the cold grasp of the dead man. It was as awful as he imagined. But then the dead man let go. But then the dead man shook his hand and let Dex go, still breathing. Death rolled to his belly and pulled back the hammer on his shooter. Did they just buddy up? Dex supposed between the two of them they had dealt more death than any duo. Today was as good a day as any to join up. Dead man waved the barrel out at the attack like he was getting impatient with Dex's sluggishness. Dex finally drew his weapon. It was about time for him to start pulling his weight for this team. Dead man shot first over the wall before standing. Dex joined him and hit nothing with 3 bullets. The attackers had pulled from cover and were moving up. The misses served to send them scattering for the closest cover again. Death ran backward. Alright, Death ran backward. Dex thought... Oh, let me make this a new paragraph. Dex thought he'd been double-crossed, but Death motioned wildly for him to come on. He almost ate a couple bullets for his delay, but got out and away from that choke point unharmed. They worked a rolling retreat. Death wasn't much of a talker, but he knew strategy. Each fired while the other reloaded. Dex noted that Death had more bullets than him. If they got out alive, so to speak, he might be out and the showdown would resume at his disadvantage. He had to survive one attack at a time, so he kept shooting. They made it almost to the edge of the empty town before they landed in a crossfire. Death kept retreating. Death kept retreating, and Dex followed. He thought at least he was done for, even if the skeleton couldn't die. Still, Death appeared to be taking cover, so maybe he was vulnerable too. Dex made the move. Dex readied himself to move again, but the dead man grabbed his arm in a bony grip and held him in place. Dex met Death's stare, but read nothing in it. He did not trust this pile of bones. but he stayed true anyway. Then he saw the plan. The ambushers moved through a choke point formed by the last buildings in town. Death nodded, and Dex pulled back his hammer. They opened up, and a few of the men ran face first into boarded walls in their panic. A few escaped as they backed away, but Death reloaded quickly and took most of the rest. Death dropped open its silent jaw in what might have been a laugh or a scream. Dead Man motioned for Dex to follow, and he did. They ran out on the trail past the first bend, and Dex cried out when he saw the skeletal horse with a saddle on its back. Death mounted up and offered a hand to Dex Kitchens. He licked. Okay, I gotta use his name, don't I? Dex licked his teeth and glanced over his shoulder. He heard the survivors shouting. Still, he said, "I think my horse is on the other side of town. I might try for that." A sharp clicking noise brought Dex's attention back around. Death was snapping his fingers at him. Without skin, it was the most awful, hair-raising noise. Dex put on a glove before he accepted Death's hand this time. The dead man pulled him up onto the skeleton horse's back. Did they run out on the trail? They did in this story. I'm not sure what the trail looks like at this point, but we'll see what's going to happen. All right. The horse rode hard with both killers on its back. Dex only let... Hey Jay, I didn't want to interrupt before. No, jump in anytime. I appreciate you being here. The horse rode hard with both killers on its back. Dex only let himself wonder for a moment how it did so with no muscle. Oh, would the skeletal animal grow tired? Shots echoed, and he looked back to see riders firing from mount as they pursued. Dex aimed as carefully as he could, but pulled off two dry poles. That's not right. Why would I say pull twice? Pulled off two dry, I'm going to say shots. Everything was perfect except he was out. Checking his belt, he confirmed and reholstered. No, you don't reholster, you just holster. Holstered is empty. I'm dry bones, he said, after he tried to get cute. He wondered if Death would understand what he meant. Alright. The dead man, I'll just call him Dead Man, that's what I've been calling him. Dead man drew a weapon and offered it back. This was turning into quite a day. Alright, Dex accepted and took aim. Death found another gun, and okay, let's comma here, and with one hand on the reins and the other twisted back parallel with Dex. They both opened up. Shouldn't have worked, but they managed more hits than misses. A couple riders sought to peel off, but death didn't let them go. The horses fled with empty saddles. Dex missed the last guy. But his partner put one into the throat. As the last fighter toppled, his rifle cracked off wild, and Dex felt it in his back. He leaned forward on death as they rode away. In the open and alone, Death pulled the undead animal to a stop. He slid off its back, leaving Dex holding onto the saddle and the extra weapon Death had given him. Alright, we're in the home stretch here. Alright. Dex took a deep breath and worked his bad arm. It felt like his shoulder took the worst of it, but that was no free ticket. The fact that Death had stopped their ride was probably a bad sign. He started to dismount, but Dead Man held him in place. Dex just stared as Death passed him the reins. Dex shook his head, not in disagreement, but in confusion. He tried to offer offer Death back his pistol, but Dead Man shook his head. So Dex found a spot in the saddlebag. The saddlebag for it. As Death started to walk back the way they had come, Dex asked, "Are you giving me a free pass?" Dead Man turned with his expressionless face, and he shrugged his bony shoulders. "What are you going to do now?" Dex asked, but then feared the answer. Death pointed to the top of his head and turned to walk away. Dex swore Death. Let me say Dead Man again. Dex swore Dead Man was telling him he was going back for his hat. Dex took in the fact that he sat on Death's skeleton horse. He needed to get somewhere he could get his shoulder tended to, but he had no idea how to explain this ride. So he clicked his tongue and got his new undead horse moving again. Alright, let's get to the last sentence. He wondered how many people would believe his story about shaking hands with death and seeing him shrug, let's say, and making him shrug in the same day. The bone horse would probably help. Alright, that is the end of that story, at least the first draft. I don't think I have, if you'll excuse the pun, I don't think I have all the bones of the story in place yet. There's some there's some there's some depth missing. I think all the metaphor I could possibly need is here. So maybe need to build out a little more of Dex's past. Maybe I need to talk about why he's chasing death, or maybe that part can be left ambiguous, and we just need a little more about the gunfight. Maybe a little more visceral detail about the people who ambushed them. Either people Dex knew or Death knew. Um, but there's probably a few pieces missing. It doesn't feel like a perfectly complete story to me yet. I do think I have a beginning, middle, and end, obviously, and it's concise, which is always good, especially if you don't think you have the full story yet.